Okay, so prior to this class, we have been discussing a number of concepts. We've talked about speech acts, different kinds of speech acts. We've discussed definitions and problems. We have also examined types of discourses. Today, we want to look at a few more things so that next week we begin to discuss logic or critical thinking. So now let's mop up whatever we have for the first half of the semester. So we are rounding up our analysis of the difference between values and facts. Like we've said before, values are about what we should or should not do. And then facts are about what is or is not. Sometimes we mistake values for facts. And in fact, there are factual statements with implicit value judgments. So you might be looking at a factual statement, but there's a value judgment in the factual statement. Let's look at an example. Look at the difference between the two statements. One, the president has lifted the lockdown. Two, the president has rightly lifted the lockdown. So the first is a factual statement, and then the second is like the first, but with an implicit value judgment represented by the word rightly. The second, therefore, is a value judgment. So just the insertion of one word into the second one transforms it from a factual statement to a value judgment. So the lesson is that we should look out for both the explicit and implicit meanings of statements. Without confirming these two kinds of meanings, you could be misled. So when you look at a statement, just be sure that it's a factual statement, because it could look like a factual statement, but it might in fact be a value judgment. So you could see how important this distinction is to our business of thinking critically. Now, before we begin to train ourselves as logicians or critical thinkers, we first of all need to identify certain kinds of statements that are not used in logic. There are certain statements that are not logical. They are just not logical in nature. And that's because they cannot be interpreted literally. If you cannot interpret a statement literally, then the statement is not useful for logical analysis. Two of such kinds of expressions are metaphors and proverbs. We need to know what they are in order to know how to handle them as logicians. Okay. So what are metaphors? Metaphors are sentences that should not be interpreted literally. Example, don't judge a book by its cover, which means don't evaluate things just by looking at their appearances. It's raining cats and dogs. It means it's raining heavily. What about proverb? Proverb is a sentence with a literal meaning as well as a non-literal one. And the non-literal meaning is usually a piece of advice. That means a proverb is a multiple purpose speech act. So let's look at some examples of proverbs. Only a fool tests the depth of a river with two of his feet. It means don't embark on a venture without a proper reflection. If you want to test the depth of a river, you can at most insert just one of your feet. But to use two of your feet to test the depth of a river is, according to the proverb, is foolish. So you don't embark on a business venture, without proper research, without a clear analysis, and of what is involved in it. It takes a whole village to raise a child. It means the community is responsible for the moral upbringing of a child. No one can lick his or her own elbow. It means no one is an island. You need the assistance of other people in your life. Now, the intentions behind proverbs. Proverbs are mostly used to advise people, but proverbs are not always sincerely used. For instance, the proverb, no one can lick his or her own elbow, can be used to encourage corruption or convince someone that it's impossible to fight corruption. Okay, a little exercise. Provide one example each of a metaphor and a proverb. So you can do that at your convenience. How is a metaphor different from a proverb? A metaphor is different from a proverb because a metaphor is a sentence that should not be interpreted literally, but a proverb has both a literal and a non-literal interpretation. So the difference is that a proverb should not be interpreted literally, but a proverb can be interpreted literally. Rebellion, put off your mind. All right, so we are done with metaphors and proverbs. Now let's go to the topic of meaning. Meaning. We've done definitions. Today, let's look at some meaning defects, some defects in meaning. So, meaning defects in language. In addition to metaphors and proverbs, there are expressions whose meanings are defective. Expressions whose meanings are defective. Such expressions cannot be used in logic because their meanings are defective. They need to be corrected first before you can use such statements as a logician. Two examples of defective meaning in expressions are vagueness and ambiguity. Let's look at vagueness. An expression is vague when its meaning has no boundaries of application. When its meaning has no boundaries of application. An expression is vague when its meaning is not precise. Examples. You'll be here any moment from now. He'll be here any moment from now. Now, any moment from now has no boundary of application. It could be anything between the next second until Jesus Christ comes again, or until the end of the world, as they say. I'll come to see your parents at the right time. I'll come to see your parents at the right time. At the right time, the phrase at the right time has no boundary of application. You just can't pin it anywhere in the calendar. So the expression is vague. That car is expensive. That car is expensive. Expensive has no boundary of application. 10 cedis could be expensive. 100 cedis could be expensive. 1,000 cedis could be expensive. 10,000 cedis could be expensive. 100,000 cedis could be expensive. 1 million cedis could be expensive. $1 million could be expensive. 1 billion cedis could be expensive. $1 billion could be expensive. So expensive has no boundary of application. Ambiguity. A sentence is ambiguous when it is capable of more than one meaning. When a sentence is capable of more than one meaning, that's ambiguity. There are three types of ambiguity: lexical ambiguity, referential ambiguity, and syntactic ambiguity. Now, remember that the difference between ambiguity and vagueness is that a vague sentence has no boundary of application. An ambiguous sentence gives you more than one possible meaning. So that's the difference between the two. So an ambiguous sentence has a boundary of application, but it will give you two of them, or three or more. Now let's look at three types of ambiguity. Lexical ambiguity. Now this is not in the required textbook. This one is in the textbook that is sold at the university bookshop, the Kingdom Bookshop. And the authors of that textbook included these three types of ambiguity so that students will be very, very clear on all aspects of ambiguity. Now let's look at them. Lexical ambiguity. If an ambiguity occurs in a single word, then it is called lexical ambiguity. An ambiguity that occurs in a single word is lexical ambiguity. Now, this type of ambiguity usually occurs in words that have the same spelling but different meaning. Words that have the same spelling but different meanings. Such words are called homographs. Such words are called homographs. Examples. He lives close to the bank. He lives close to the bank. Does he live close to a river bank or a bank as a financial institution? So the word bank is an ambiguous word. It's called a homograph. The same spelling but different meanings. Military head, 6 arms. Military head, 6 arms. Is it that the head of a military man? Is it that the head of a military man or the head of the military as an institution? And then what about the arms? Is it the arms of a military man or are you talking about weapons? So both the head and the arms are homographs. They're ambiguous words. Other homographs include raise, chest, light. These are words with multiple meanings. Race has multiple meanings. Chest has multiple meanings. Light has multiple meanings. Now let's look at referential ambiguity. Referential. This type of ambiguity occurs when a phrase or a word in a particular context could refer to two or more properties of things in a sentence. Referential ambiguity occurs from the use of pronouns and quantifiers. This is the ambiguity in pronouns. The ambiguity in pronouns. Let's look at an example. The boy told his theft case, and he was very upset. The boy told his father about the theft case, and he was very upset. Who is upset, the boy or the father? So the pronoun he does not specify which of the nouns in the sentence it is referring to. So referential ambiguity is ambiguity that arises from the use of pronouns. From the use of pronouns. He used deceit to sell the soup to me. He used deceit to sell the soup to me, but I did not buy it. He used deceit to sell the soap to me, but I did not buy it. What did I not buy? The deceit or the soap? So here to the pronoun it fails to specify which noun it is referring to. Now let's look at syntactic or sentential ambiguity. Sentential, you can just call it sentential ambiguity. When a sentence contains two or more possible meanings, then the sentence is ambiguous. Now, sentential ambiguity occurs when it is clear what the individual words in the sentence mean, but it is not clear what the whole sentence means. So in this type of ambiguity, the individual words are clear, but when you put them together to form a whole sentence, it is not clear. So it is not a case of lexical ambiguity, ambiguity that arises from an individual word. The individual words are fine, but when you put them together, the sentence itself doesn't look specific. So this is ambiguity at the level of a sentence, not at the level of a word. Examples. Today we shall be discussing violence on TV. Today we shall be discussing violence on TV. Is it that discussion of violence will be held on a TV program? Or that violence on TV will be the topic of discussion? The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. The dean will talk about cheating in the seminar room. Is the dean going to talk about cheating that happened in the seminar room? Or is cheating the topic of the lecture she's going to deliver in the seminar room? Which one of them? So these are examples of sentential ambiguity. Now, what is the difference between vagueness and ambiguity? I had mentioned it before. A vague term does not indicate a clear boundary of applying a meaning of the term. A vague term does not indicate a clear boundary of applying a meaning of the term. On the other hand, an ambiguous term gives us ideas of what it means, but suggests more than one accepted meaning. Suggests more than one accepted meaning, leaving us confused as to which of the meanings particularly is intended. So vagueness is no clear meaning. Ambiguity means more than one accepted meaning. The role of vagueness and ambiguity in language. Vagueness and ambiguity can facilitate equivocation and disagreement in language. They can facilitate equivocation and disagreement. The role of vagueness and ambiguity can also be found in metaphors and proverbs. So when you see a metaphor, you see that it's intentionally vague to some extent so that you can interpret it in a non-literal way. And that's why metaphors and proverbs are not usable in logical analysis. Now, let's look at equivocation. Equivocation occurs when someone shifts unannounced from one meaning of a word to another meaning of the same word in the same passage. Equivocation occurs when someone shifts unannounced from one meaning of a word to another meaning of the same word in the same passage. This is usually done with the hope of confusing the reader. So someone could use a particular word more than once in a passage, and in the places she uses them with different meanings. In other words, equivocation is the usage of a homograph for different purposes or for different meanings in a passage. Equivocation is to take advantage of ambiguity, because equivocation means taking advantage of the ambiguous nature of words to persuade or confuse readers. We shall study equivocation as a form of argument later in chapter 12. Let's see some examples of equivocation. Example: time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. Time flies like an arrow and fruit flies like a banana. The first flies is a verb meaning moving in the air. The first flies is a verb meaning moving in the air. The second flies is rather a noun indicating fruit insects. Fruit insects. The first like is used for the purpose of comparison. The first like is used for a purpose of comparison. The second like is used as a verb indicating a preference for something. I'm celebrating my birthday in a gay manner because I'm gay. I'm celebrating my birthday in a gay manner because I'm gay. The first use of gay means happiness, and the second means the state of being a homosexual. So when one word is occurring more than once in a passage with different meanings, that's technically equivocation, especially when it is done to confuse the reader. If it is not to confuse the reader, then it's fine. Strategy for identifying equivocation. So if you want to identify equivocation, or if you are asked in an examination to identify equivocation, what do? There are 3 steps. First of all, ascertain whether a word has been used more than once in the sentence or passage. Find out which word has been used more than once. Then proceed to check if the word or expression has different meanings in the sentence or passage. Find out if that word has different meanings in the same passage. If you're able to make these 2 observations, then the sentence or passage contains equivocation. The importance of identifying equivocation. Note that vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation are very important in clarifying arguments. They are very important in clarifying arguments. If certain expressions are vague or ambiguous in a sentence, their meaning needs to be clarified before we can proceed to evaluate the argument. So once a passage contains these meaning defects, they need to be clarified or cleared up or sorted out before such a passage can be used for logical analysis. Let's do some exercises. Determine whether each of the following is vague or ambiguous. Determine whether each of the following is vague or ambiguous. Number 1, we should raise tax on the rich. We should raise tax on the rich. Is it vague or ambiguous? Someone answer that. If you want to answer, please unmute your microphone and then tell us what it is.
Vague statement alone.
Ebenezer raised his hand, so you can proceed.
It's vague.
Okay, it's vague. Please explain why it is vague. Can you tell us why it is vague? Can someone help?
Yeah, please. It's vague because it doesn't have any boundaries.
Okay. So can you tell us which of the particular word, is the vagueness? Which particular word is
It's can you be the tax?
Um,
Can it be the tax?
is it a tax?
We
Is it a tax?
have different types of tax. State or tax, input tax.
Okay, Chris. You said it's a tax. Now, any other attempt? Any other help?
Hello.
Yes, yes. I'm hearing you. Okay, so
Yeah.
yes, you said it is a tax.
It's big because the question says that we should rate tax on the rich. So yeah, there are no boundaries because we don't know the exact period that the tax will be put on the rich.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
And,
Uh,
and again, we have different types of tax. We have the import tax or import duty or something like or that like direct tax. We have the many tax.
Yeah, there are many types of
Hello.
tax,
it's very
but it is presupposed
because
that the one that would apply to the
we don't
rich is the one meant for the rich.
know. They say we, but we don't know who the we is.
Okay. So the vague word is actually the rich. The vague term is actually the rich. Why? Because it was not specified who the rich is. There is no indication of where we can start counting the rich. So it was not specified whether the rich begins from those who have 10,000 Ghana cedis or 100,000, or 1 million cedis. There was no specification. So the word rich has no boundary of application. Then the second one,
Later.
number
Sir,
two.
please, it's a value. It's later.
I'll be back later.
It's later.
Is it
Sir,
is it
please,
vague?
it's a value.
It's ambiguous.
It's a vague. Vague.
Okay, so if it is vague, why is it vague? What makes it vague?
Sir, because of the later.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just pick out the vague word.
The
What is the vague
the
word?
later doesn't specify
Okay,
Exactly.
look.
because it can be tomorrow. Later can be tomorrow or in 30 minutes time.
20 years or 20 years.
Okay, so the word later has no boundary of application.
Yes.
Okay, so that's good. Number three, I'm renting the new apartment. I'm renting the new apartment. About 6 people's hands are raised. So I'm renting a new apartment. Is it vague or ambiguous?
Ambiguous.
Okay, please explain why it's ambiguous.
It is big.
Okay,
That's
so
vague.
why? Okay, why is it vague? Explain why it's vague.
So the new apartment.
How will you know whether it is? Maybe it will be. It is re-innovated. Know how new is it?
Okay, so what about the word renting? What about the word renting?
That's it.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, for the renting, we don't know whether the person is renting it whether the apartment is for rent or is renting it to live in it.
Okay.
Yeah, so you don't know whether it is the landlord or the tenant.
It's ambiguous.
Can you say is the landlord or the tenant? So you wouldn't be able to. Number 4, stolen jewel found by a tree. Stolen jewel found by
Vague.
vague. Okay, so explain
It's
this.
ambiguous.
The
If
sentence
you
doesn't
say,
have a clear meaning.
go ahead.
The sentence doesn't have a clear meaning.
And what about the guy who said it's ambiguous? Why do you think it's ambiguous?
Because for the stolen jewel found, it could be that the stolen jewel was found by the tree.
Okay, so the ambiguous term is by. The ambiguous term is by. Was the jewel beside the tree, or that the tree found the jewel? The impression is that the tree, has become something that can find something. So one meaning is that the tree found the jewel. And the other meaning is that the jewel was found beside the tree.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Sir, please come again.
The ambiguous word is by, by. The word by gives you two meanings of the sentence. Who can tell us the two meanings?
So the by could mean that the tree has now become an animate object. So it found a jewel, or it was found in a position near the tree.
Yeah, that's correct. So the word by is giving you two very good meanings. Two very good meanings. And each of the meaning is each of the meaning looks meaningful.
Sir, please question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, this is the statement 3. I am renting a new apartment. Please, did you say it is vague?
No, it is ambiguous because it could be that
Tenant and a landlord.
it could be that the landlord is renting the apartment to someone, or that a tenant is renting the apartment from the landlord. Now, the ambiguity in number 3 comes from renting. When you say you are renting, it is not clear if you are a landlord renting to a tenant or if you are a tenant renting from a landlord. And each of the meanings is legitimate and acceptable. What about number 5? Democracy is freedom for all. We did that already, so I'm sure you already know the answer.
It's vague.
Vague.
And where does the
It's
vagueness
vague.
come from?
Sir, because of the
For
all.
all.
Okay. Yeah, so it should have been all persons.
Yes, sir.
Not just all, Okay, so number 6.
Ambiguous.
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 Two vehicles collide.
It's ambiguous.
Okay,
It's
so
ambiguous.
please explain the ambiguity.
It's ambiguous because we don't know the actual thing that was being stated that died. Is it a human being or the one of the vehicles?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. One died. Two vehicles collide, one died. Normally, when you say one died, the sentence should have been two persons collided. Two persons collided, or two dogs collided, one died. Then it's understandable. But when you say two vehicles collide, one died, and nothing was said about passengers, so you don't even know what died. So you have 2 minutes. Either that one vehicle died or one person died. Okay, number 7. Number 7, court tries shooting defendant. Court tries shooting defendant.
It's ambiguous.
It's ambiguous.
Explain.
I say because it could mean that the court is trying the defendant in a legal sense, or they actually use a physical gun to attempt to shoot him or her.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. That's correct.
So did I have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's for the number 7. What the word court isn't vague.
No, we know what court is.
Saying court drive defendant. Can
Yeah,
a
it
court
was.
even shoot?
Yeah, so it was in the 18th century that court meant a king's palace. You know, the palace of kings was referred to courts in the 18th century. You know, but now hardly anyone refers to that. You know, when you say court, everyone knows it's a law court.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you, sir.
So now let's round up by looking at some senses of law. This one is just a drill so that we know the senses of law before we begin to do logic. Senses of law. We need to understand the different ways in which we use the word law. Let me now we're done with the questions. I'll mute everyone. Okay, so that we have absolute quiet. Don't, if you open your mic, please close it again. So we need to understand different ways in which we use the word law. We have 7 senses. We have natural law, civil law, cultural norm, which is convention or social rule. We have customary law, moral law, logical law, mathematical law, divine law. Definition of law. There's no single definition. You can't define law. Now, law is too large to be defined, and you'll see why immediately. You can only define different senses of law, but not just law. So natural laws also called scientific law. Here we can define what you can define what a natural law is. You can define what civil law is. You can define what cultural law is, cultural norm is. You can define what divine law is, what a moral law is, what a mathematical law is. But you cannot define law, just law. It's too broad to be defined. Okay. So natural laws, also called scientific laws, they refer to statements describing the regularity or uniformity in the pattern of events or properties of things in the world. They refer to statements describing the regularity or uniformity in the patterns of events or properties of things in the world. We form these laws based on past experiences. If, for instance, you observe that the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west, that's a natural or scientific law. Did someone raise his hand?
Yes, sir.
Mashood Ibrahim. Yeah, is there something urgent?
Sir, I wanted to know if some empirical statements are natural laws. Because if they are based on past experiences.
Empirical statements, by that we mean statements of fact, factual statements. Factual statements are not necessarily natural laws, as factual statements are too broad. They are broader than natural laws. Any statement identifying a fact, but is different from it's not necessarily a statement that states a natural law. So factual statements have to do with empirical issues, but they mustn't be natural laws, because you can make a factual statement that is not a natural law, that is not outlining a natural law.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right. Other examples of natural law: planets revolve around the sun. The atomic weight of gold is 12. Animals survive on oxygen. Anything that has weight falls to the ground if suspended in the air. These are natural laws. The first one we saw is that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. That's a natural law. Civil or statutory laws, laws made by man to regulate human behavior, especially legal instruments accompanied by sanction and backed by force. So these are man-made laws. Examples: commercial law, tax law, criminal law, corporate law, constitutional law, traffic law, human rights law, and so on. They must be obeyed by all citizens. They are accompanied by prescribed punishment for disobedience. So when you disobey them, you are caught by, the police. Is the duty of the police to take you to court and accuse you before the court. Cultural norms, social conventions, or social rules, common understandings about how we should do certain things. See, the phrase used here is common understandings. They are referring, common understanding is used because there might not be punishment. So these are common understandings about how we should do certain things, whether in traditional societies, in the case of cultural norms, or in modern societies, in the case of social conventions, or in any society, group, or organization or institution, in the case of social rules. Disobedience is not normally punishable, but attracts social disapproval. So if, for instance, there's a burial ceremony and everyone appears in black, and then you appear in white, there's no punishment for it, but you might meet with disapproval. Examples include how we should dress, speak, receive visitors, worship, eat, observe public holidays, attend social functions, and so on. Customary law. Now, customary law is when a cultural norm becomes a civil law. So sometimes the government can decide to elevate some cultural norms in a community to a civil law so that the disobedience can be punished. In that case, disobeying such a norm becomes punishable. We have customary courts in rural areas. Examples of cultural norms that could become customary law are the powers of a chief, traditional marriage rights and duties. So there are certain infractions of traditional marriage rights and duties that could be punished by a customary court. Moral law. Now, there's no universally accepted definition of moral law. Moral law is difficult to define, just like law itself. But moral laws are about rules prescribing how we should or should not behave. Rules prescribing how we should or should not behave. So I think that's the simplest description you can afford of moral law. Usually, for a rule of behavior to be regarded as a moral law, such a rule is universally respected. Usually, for a rule of behavior to be accepted as moral law, such a rule must be universally accepted. It is something that nobody questions all over the world. Examples: do not steal, do not kill, do not discriminate, or take someone else's spouse, and so on. Anywhere you do this, whether it's in Africa, Australia, US, people will get angry. So it's universally accepted that these behaviors are immoral. There's nowhere you do it with human beings around and they will be happy. Logical law. Logical law, these are rules for reasoning. Logical law refers to rules. A logical law is a rule for reasoning. Most common examples are deductive and inductive reasoning, which of course we'll be doing discussing deductive reasoning next week. Example of deductive reasoning: all men are mortal. Kofi is a man, therefore Kofi is mortal. Mathematical laws, rules for mathematical operations. Examples: never divide by zero. All the rules of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division are mathematical laws. Divine laws. Laws credited with a supernatural source. Laws credited with a supernatural source. The Bible says that Moses went up to Mount Sinai and there he received the 10 Commandments. So, according to the Bible, the 10 Commandments has a supernatural source. That's technically what we define as a divine law. A law that is credited with a supernatural source. Examples depend on the religion in question. For example, in Christianity, there are laws about relating with God, praying, forgiving those who offend us, and so on. Okay, so that's the end. At the end of the session, you should be able to identify factual statements that are implicit value judgments, distinguish metaphors from proverbs, understand vagueness, ambiguity, and equivocation, understand the various senses of law. Remember to do all your textbook exercises on metaphors, proverbs, vagueness, ambiguity, equivocation, and the senses of law. So I hope you have access to textbook materials. Some time ago, I looked at the announcement on Sakai, and it looks like you have received some materials online. I'll be happy if there are exercises in those materials. If you don't have them, and if you cannot have access to, I know the required textbook was not produced this semester, but there's another one at the BAM library, so you can check that one. It has 100 exercises for each unit. Although the units are not called units, they are called chapters. Now, that book was written for all the tertiary institutions in the country. So that's why it's a little bit bigger, but the topics are the same. It's very important for you to do your exercises. When you read the lessons, it's not enough. You need the exercises to drive the lessons in. I think the exercises are your surest bet, your best way of preparing for the assessments and the exams. All right, so next week we start logic with the various kinds of reasoning, beginning with deductive reasoning. Before we round up, let's take some questions. If you have a question, please ask so that we attend to it and then we close. Ask your questions. If you don't have questions now, you can, a question can come into your mind at any time. Whenever you get a question, then you can just send it to my email.
Sir, please, how can we get the recorded section?
Yeah, I believe I've sent that of the speech acts and I think the definitions, the discourses, I couldn't retrieve it because it looks like Microsoft deleted it after 4 hours. So I think I've sent speech acts and definitions, and I'm gonna send this one to. I'll try to download it early in the morning. That's the only time it can be downloaded. So you'll get them.
Okay, on Sakai.
On your WhatsApp groups, and then any of you can post it to Sakai. Okay, so I will look at Sakai later on and see if I can send it to your resources.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I'm going to stop the recording.